The grand wedding hall glittered with gold chandeliers, violins played softly in the background, and yet, for Alexander Grant, the cold and ruthless CEO who had built an empire from nothing, none of it felt like a celebration. He stood at the altar, surrounded by curious eyes and murmured whispers, his jaw tight and his hands clenched into fists. He had faced hostile board meetings, billion-dollar deals on the verge of collapse, and ruthless competitors trying to crush him, but nothing compared to the humiliation he felt in this very moment. For in front of him stood his bride, her face hidden behind layers of lace and silk, and the cruel thought pounded in his head, they tricked me into marrying an ugly woman. He hadn't chosen this marriage. It had been arranged by his family and her guardians, a merger of power and wealth disguised as holy matrimony. He resisted it for months, but relentless pressure had cornered him into accepting. Now, as he looked at the delicate frame of the woman in white, with her head bowed and shoulders trembling as though she carried a mountain of shame, his heart hardened further. 1,000 mocking voices seemed to echo in his mind. People would laugh at him, the mighty CEO fooled at the altar. But what Alexander didn't know, what no one in the hall yet understood, was that beneath that veil was a truth that would shatter every assumption he had ever made about love, beauty, and life itself. Backhand index pointing right before I continue, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share it with others. Join our family here at I Am Kindness Corner, where every story reminds us of the hidden strength of the human heart. The ceremony dragged on, but Alexander's mind was elsewhere. He remembered how he had begged his father to call it off, how he had said he didn't want to marry someone he hadn't chosen, someone whose reputation in whispers was less than flattering. But his father had been unmoved, speaking of alliances and responsibilities, dismissing his son's protests as childish tantrums. Now, with every vow spoken by the priest, Alexander's resentment only grew. He didn't even glance at his bride, choosing instead to look beyond her, refusing to acknowledge her existence. And then came the moment. The veil. His fingers trembled as he reached for it, not from nerves but from disgust. He wanted this to end quickly, to get through the motions and face the inevitable laughter. With one swift motion, he lifted the veil. And froze. The hall seemed to disappear. The music dulled. His breath caught in his throat. The bride's face was revealed, and it was not what he had expected. She was not ugly. She was breathtaking, though not in the shallow, magazine cover way he had always imagined beauty. Her eyes, wide and luminous, carried a depth of pain and strength that pierced through him. Her skin glowed with a fragile delicacy, and her lips quivered as though holding back years of unspoken words. But what shook Alexander to his core was not just her beauty, it was the sadness etched into her face. It was the kind of sadness that comes from a life of wounds, betrayals, and silent endurance. It was the kind of sadness that made her more human, more real, than anyone he had ever met in his polished, ruthless world. For the first time in his life, Alexander's arrogance faltered. The ceremony ended, but his mind was a storm. He didn't speak to her, didn't know what to say. Guests cheered, toasts were made, photographs were taken, yet all he could think about was the moment her veil lifted and the ocean of emotion he had seen in her eyes. That night, instead of celebrating, he sat alone in his study, pouring himself drink after drink, haunted by the silent strength of his bride. Her name was Elara. And her story, he was soon to discover, would unravel everything he thought he knew about life. Elara had grown up in silence and shadows. Orphaned at a young age, she had been raised by distant relatives who treated her as little more than a burden. She was forced into this marriage not for love, but to settle debts and secure their own wealth. She had entered the wedding with no hope, believing she was nothing more than a pawn in another man's game. But behind her quietness lay a mind filled with dreams, a heart that longed to be seen, and a resilience carved from years of hardship. Days turned into weeks. At first, Alexander avoided her, burying himself in work, too proud to admit that he was drawn to the mystery in her silence. But slowly, small moments began to change him. He would catch her in the garden at dawn, her hands gently touching the roses as though they were friends. He saw the way she smiled at the servants, with kindness and warmth he had never shown them. He noticed how she sat with his aging mother, listening to her stories with patience when he himself never found the time. Each moment chipped away at his walls. One evening, after returning late from the office, he found her asleep at the dining table, a plate of untouched food in front of her. She had waited for him. The sight pierced him deeper than he could understand. He carried her gently to her room, and as he laid her down, he whispered words he didn't know he had inside him, "Maybe I was wrong about you. But change does not come easily." Alexander wrestled with himself, with his pride, with the shadows of his old beliefs. His world had taught him that beauty was surface deep, that kindness was weakness, that love was a distraction. And yet, every day with Alara proved those lessons false. She showed him through actions, not words, that love was not a weakness but a quiet strength that could heal even the coldest heart. The turning point came when Alexander fell gravely ill. Stress, exhaustion, and years of neglecting his health caught up with him, leaving him bedridden for weeks. Business partners whispered of his downfall, employees panicked, and competitors circled like vultures. But Alara never left his side. She wiped his forehead, fed him with her own hands, and sat awake through nights, whispering prayers he never believed in. When he finally opened his eyes after days of fever, the first thing he saw was her tired face, her tear-stained cheeks, and her fragile smile that carried the weight of endless hope. For the first time, Alexander felt something unfamiliar, gratitude. And with it came a realization: this woman, the one he had judged and dismissed, was the only person in his life who had truly loved him without asking for anything in return. From that day forward, Alexander changed. Not in dramatic overnight gestures, but in small, meaningful ways. He began to listen more than he spoke. He made time for family dinners, not as formalities but as moments to share. He smiled at his employees, asked about their lives, and helped those in need quietly without seeking recognition. And through it all, Alara remained by his side, her gentle presence guiding him toward becoming the man he was always meant to be. Months later, during a company gala, Alexander took the stage. But instead of speaking about profits or expansion, he spoke of kindness, resilience, and the unseen battles people fight every day. He spoke of the woman who had shown him that love was not about appearances but about the courage to stand by someone even when the world turns away. And as he turned to look at Alara, tears glistened in her eyes, for she knew those words were his silent vow to her. Their marriage, which had begun as a forced contract, became a bond of unshakable love. Together, they built not just an empire of wealth but a legacy of compassion, touching countless lives with their story. Alexander, once known as the ruthless CEO, was now remembered as the man who changed, not because of power or money, but because of a woman who taught him the true meaning of love. And Alara, the bride once hidden behind a veil of shame, became the light that guided not just Alexander but everyone who crossed her path. Her beauty was no longer doubted, for it shone not from her face alone, but from the kindness and strength that radiated from her soul. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe to I Am Kindness Corner. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that true love is about the soul, not the surface. Your support helps us spread more stories of hope, faith, and second chances. Before we end, I have a special request. Please comment below with the words, "True love sees the soul," if you believe in the kind of love that Alexander and Alara found. And remember this: sometimes, the greatest love stories begin where expectations end, and where the heart learns to see what the eyes once could not.